My name is Kazim. I'm a researcher here at Community Policy Forum. So, Community Policy Forum is an independent think tank seeking to promote evidence-based and community-centered approaches to policymaking surrounding the structural inequalities facing Muslim communities here in the UK. We attempt this through connecting policymakers with academic research and experts, and through providing platforms for engagement with diverse Muslim voices on areas of contemporary importance. So the UK government proposed significant fiscal changes that would affect private schools in England and Wales. These changes include introducing a 20% VAT on private school fees and removing charitable rates relief, both of which aim to reduce inequality in education and generate additional revenue to support public services, such as hiring 6,500 more teachers. However, there's growing concern that these reforms may disproportionately impact smaller faith schools, potentially forcing some to close. This could cause significant disruption for families who depend on these institutions for their children's education. So today we're joined by the chairman of the Association of Muslim Schools, Ashfaque Chowdhury. The Association of Muslim Schools was established in 1992 by the famous Nasheed artist, Yusuf Islam, to coordinate the work of Muslim schools and share best practice in advancing the education of Muslim children here in the UK. Thank you so much, Brother Ashfaque, for taking time out of your schedule to join us today.
Wa alaikum assalam. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. Jazakallah khair for having me.
Thank you. So I just wanted to kick off the discussion just to set a bit of context for those that are listening. What is a Muslim school, and how popular are Muslim schools across England and Wales? And secondly, why do you feel they are important?
Well, first of all, Muslim schools are schools which have a denominationally chosen to be of having a faith ethos as a minimum, which is Islamic. Muslim schools play a very critical part in the UK education system. You would have seen some of our very successful schools in the state sector, led by Mufti Hamid Patel, Sir Mufti Hamid Patel, Star Academies, doing some wonderful work in the state sector. And to be honest, almost like now, they are standard bearers in the state sector. Similarly, we've got some outstanding Muslim private schools who charge almost a quarter of the fees of conventional private schools, and in many cases have outstanding quality, which supersedes in many ways the achievement of their state, the private school counterparts who charge like commercial rate fees or standard rate fees. And alhamdulillah, Muslim schools over the years have shown significant success across, building up young people and getting them ready for careers. It's not necessarily every school, similar to state schools. There is, of course, certain schools that haven't achieved the benchmark. But across the piece, we can confidently say there is a sector that has produced the outstanding citizens. It's a sector that has created tomorrow's leaders and still creating as we speak. And it's a sector with enormous potential. To be honest, our schools are at the a transition at the moment in terms of leadership from generation to generation. And there's enormous potential going forward for these schools.
So you've kind of touched on a lot of the positive elements of these Muslim schools, the impact that they have for communities and some of the potential that they may have. In this respect, what concerns do you and your colleagues at AMS have about how this new VAT policy might affect independent Muslim schools?
So first of all, to say the word I would use is cataclysmic in one sense, purely because you see our schools have been and have been set up by in many cases by masajid who actually had a totally charitable objective, never wanted to make profit. It was simply set up to just run on a break even, sometimes less than a break even, where masjids decided to support these schools because they're educating children in Islam and Iman, and also protecting the Islamic heritage of the children. So many of them actually chose to even subsidize these schools in the sense that charging peppercorn rents, sometimes even doing collections for certain activities, or sometimes with some infrastructure work like an IT lab needs building and so on and so forth. So what has happened is suddenly by imposing VAT, which should have been only targeted to schools that are profit-making or have got significant reserves, it actually is going to hit schools who do not have any reserves whatsoever. In many cases, they are now in debt because it's debt to the community, so it's a manageable debt in many cases, or sometimes to the masajid even at the same time. And what it does mean when that 20% is added, it's not just 20% that's added. So it's a deceptive figure of saying it's 20% that's been added. 20% VAT is added to fees, but at the same time, the business rates, that 80% discount on business rates is removed. So in some cases, for some schools, let's imagine London, that would be a 40% impact. So as a parent, we have sort of, middle-class hand-to-mouth parents in Muslim schools. The average earning of a Muslim school parent would be somewhere around 25,000 to say 30,000. That's the average earner in a Muslim school. That's what our experience suggests. Suddenly, if they hit with 40% increase in fees, they will have no means to pay for this. And what that essentially would do is push these schools towards a closure. So it's a very flawed system where the government has really done no proper research on impact. If they have it, they should show us what research have they done. We haven't seen anything. We've met, in fact, we even met the Treasury team this week, and they haven't produced anything that's convincing in that regards. So essentially, schools were that created not for profit, not to have significant reserves, and now hit with almost like an existential threat at the moment.
And I mean, what do you think should be done on the government level to ensure that these impacts are mitigated? And I also wanted to ask what steps yourselves at AMS have taken in order to address these issues.
I'll start with the first one, what we've done, and then I'm going to talk about certain things that we're asking of the government to do. Let me give you a little bit of a picture, right? It's not just Muslims who are affected. It's across the piece. We've got Catholics, we've got various denominations of Christians, we've got Greek Orthodox, we've got Hindus who are affected, we've got the Jewish community who's got affected, you've got people who are not necessarily subscribing to particular sort of faith ethos like the Quakers. They're affected as well. And in total, let me give you a national picture, right? I've got the stats in front of me. A grand total of 1,021 schools are going to be affected. And that is nearly 40% or 44% of the independent school sector, right? So if you look at it, these schools, they have a grand total of nearly 372,000 students in them. This is not a meager figure, it's a huge, huge figure. And to be honest with you, the average number of pupils in them is very small. The average number comes to about 365. Let's talk about us Muslims as well at the same time, right? So we're looking at between 148 to 152 schools. But within them, we have got just shy of 21,000 students just in our private schools, not counting the state schools at the same time. And we also have an average student population of between sort of, 80 to 140. That's the typical sort of numbers within these schools. So when we talk about the impact's not just on us. The impact is actually on the whole country. The impact is on all faith communities. So just to say that we're not the only ones affected, there's a lot of people who are affected as well at the same time. And a lot of people are very upset with the government that they have not given this due regard, which they should have done their research properly. They should have looked at the impact assessment properly prior to launching this policy in a rush. January, mind you, how many months have schools really got to do this? So we, from the time of the last Labour conference, we attended, a colleague of ours attended the conference. And since then, we've been very proactive about it because our analysis suggested that this is going to be literally, it's going to put schools, to push schools towards closure, unless, there's some other strategy that comes up. So we've been talking to the Independent Schools Council, which is one of the membership body, or the largest membership body of independent schools on a regular basis. We've been to Parliament to lobby parliamentarians, and we held open days in Parliament. We independently been talking to many MPs. We've approached the Education Secretary. directly as well. We approached various members of the Labour Party because when we were looking at the stats in the election, it was pretty clear that the Labour Party were clear favourites to win. Of course, we kept our engagement going with the current government of that time, at that point in time. We've been to sort of collaborative meetings between other faiths, like I mentioned, the various faiths that are there. So we've been for collaborative meetings with them. All of them expressed the same concern. All of them said, look, our fees in almost all cases are less than what the state charges. The average fee for a Muslim school, if you look at the national average, is about 3,189, where it costs about minimum 7,500 to teach a child in the state sector. So these kind of figures, these kind of problems have been put in front of them again and again and again. And we believe that the government hasn't really looked at their impact assessment properly. So this is part one. The second part is about, what are we asking? So first of all, we're saying that the government should have two criteria for independent schools. One called independent community. The other one is called independent. So which means that schools re-register or redesignate themselves under some contractual obligations, whereby schools that are going to be making profit stay the usual independent schools. And the truth be told, popular independent schools, I don't think they're going to be affected because the parents are very affluent. They're not necessarily your normal, the working class person. They do have disposable income. In a worst case scenario, they're not going to pull their kids out. They're just going to continue funding their children. So we are saying that there should be two different criteria, one called independent community, and the other one is the standard private route. And the test for independent community should be schools that charge less than what it costs to educate a child in the state sector, which will automatically put out people who want to make a profit. There's no way you're going to make profit if your fees are less than 7,500. If your fees are, say, the average 3.5, that's our schools, there's no way you're ever going to make a profit. The second thing that we're saying to the government is that we as Muslims are being discriminated against for years and decades past, where only 3 to 4% of our Muslim children have a choice, right, to go to Muslim schools. Whereas there are other communities, other faith communities, where 68% of their children have the ability to go to their school of their faith, be it state-funded, be it private. So we are saying to government that because of the lack of provision in the state sector, because there is so few state-funded Muslim schools, so few places available in proportionality to the number of Muslims in the UK, until and unless there is adequate provision, then we are actually discriminated against compared to other religious groups. The third point, what we are raising with government, is that this is only going to make child poverty even worse. One of the manifesto of the current government is to work on child poverty and alleviate child poverty. This will punish families who are hand to mouth, who have a limited restricted budget, who've been affected by the cost of living. And further, another £400 to £500 per child will now be imposed on them annually. And imagine if you've got 3 children, that's £1,500 added to your bill for educating your children, where you are struggling anyway to pay for those fees in the first place. So we are saying to Treasury that there should be a cap of either £8,000 to £10,000, and any schools that charge above that, they should be VAT, the VAT should be imposed on them. And anyone who's charging less than 8,000 or 10,000, whichever figure they're happy with, they should look at imposing the VAT. We even go into the next part, which is, if we look at a simple impact assessment, for every sort of Muslim child, they might get about 400 to say between £400 to £500 on average in terms of VAT. But if one Muslim school child went back into the state sector as a result of this policy, then what the Treasury will lose is £8,000. So let's do the maths, it's 20 times. So if, for example, they were charging VAT on 20 children, that if one child goes back to the state as a result of that, all that VAT that's collected is now finished. There's nothing left, really, to be honest. And the final point that I wanted to also raise was the level of redundancies that will come in. As these schools close, there will be lots and lots of support staff, teachers, leaders. They're all going to be redundant. Who's going to find a job in say February? January, they're imposing this on the schools. So, and also, we also got to look at the administrative burden. The schools have to learn the system, subscribe to the system all by January. So there's a lot of flaws in the system, and unfortunately, as I said, we believe that the government needs to reevaluate its position.
Thank you for sort of that very in-depth overview and statistical insight into the impact that this policy will no doubt have. Just wanted to wrap up with one final question. Obviously, those of you, for example, at AMS UK, those of us at Community Policy Forum, we have access to those in government, in parliament, in the corridors of power. What would your message be to, for example, Muslim parents, to masajid, to just regular members of any Muslim community up and down the country? If they are concerned about this new policy, what can they do in order to have an impact?
I think first thing to say is that we as a Muslim community are an ummah. There are many Muslim parents who don't send their children to Muslim school. That is indeed their choice. It's an informed choice they've come across. But it is important that they respond to the government's consultation, which is open until the 15th of September. Every single parent, be it a parent who sends their children to Muslim schools or not, should be part of this fairness agenda. It is about fairness end of the day. They should be part of this fairness agenda. They should be responding to the consultation, raising their concerns about this policy and how this policy has been sort of adopted so quickly, without much thought, without enough time to absorb anything, and also, as I said, impact measurement at the same time. The second thing, the masajid. The masajid, as I said, there are many schools, Muslim schools, that are built inside masajid. The masajid have to take a very proactive role in engaging their local MPs, objecting to this policy, explaining the consequences of this policy on an entire community. And indeed, relationship has been frosty, just to be diplomatic, between the Muslim community and the government in relation to various international sort of concerns that the Muslim community had. This will only going to aggravate that situation. And finally, Muslim schools, this is my message to Muslim schools as well, they need to be very proactive in engaging their local MP. They need to write directly to the Secretary of State. They need to write directly to the minister who's responsible for faith affairs to raise their concerns. This is our chance. 15th of September is the cutoff for that. This is our time to say, we don't agree with this. And it's a democracy end of the day. People have power.